Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the misty streets of old Hanoi, back when the city barely stretched beyond its sleepy lakes. You can almost feel the cool dew clinging to your skin, can't you? The morning air smells faintly of damp wood, and somewhere, just barely there, a ribbon of warm broth drifts lazily between the tiled roofs. You wouldn't survive 5 minutes here without complaining. No comfy sneakers, no Wi-Fi, and definitely no air conditioning. But trust me, your senses would thank you for it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, your sandals slapping softly against uneven stone, and the sky above is nothing but a faded watercolor wash of gray. The sun hasn't committed to rising yet, just hanging there behind thin clouds, letting a dim silver glow spread across the crooked wooden balconies. You smell wet earth first, mud, and the faint metallic tang of rain that fell hours ago. And then it hits you, the broth. It slides through the air like a secret, weaving between roof beams and dangling laundry, soft but impossible to ignore. You pause under a leaning bamboo awning, watching as steam coils out from a corner you can't see. Somewhere a pot is bubbling, slow and patient like it has been for hours. A dog trots past you, nose twitching, tail low. Even it can smell the promise of breakfast. The streets are hushed, except for the occasional creak of a wooden door and the distant, hollow sound of a ladle knocking against metal. You walk again, your feet splashing in shallow puddles, and you catch sight of the first shopfront stirring awake. No signboard, just an old woman crouched behind a plank of wood propped on 2 crates. She's fanning something with a woven palm fan, and every push sends a puff of smoky air curling into the mist. You can almost taste the fat in it, glistening and heavy. Your hands brush against a damp wall as you step closer, careful not to slip. It's barely dawn, yet a few people are already standing in line, shoulders hunched against the chill. No one talks, they just stare at the rising steam like worshippers at a shrine. A kid yawns so wide you can hear it, then leans into his mother's arm, eyes half shut, waiting for the first bowls to appear. The smell shifts. At first it's just meat, but now hints of star anise and cinnamon leak through. It feels strange, doesn't it? Spices this fragrant in a place this quiet. Back then, they were expensive, almost exotic, and every tiny pinch mattered. You imagine someone sneaking more into the pot when nobody's watching. Maybe that's why this corner smells richer than the rest. You pass an open window and catch a glimpse of the broth itself. Cloudy at the bottom, clear at the top, shimmering under the faint light of an oil lamp. The old woman bends over it, her hands moving slowly, almost lovingly, skimming away something invisible with the back of a wooden spoon. For a second, it's hypnotic, like she's painting patterns on water. A bicycle rattles by, its tires leaving wobbly tracks in the mud, and you step aside, pressing against the wall. The cyclist doesn't even glance at you. His eyes are fixed ahead, where the scent grows thicker, almost tangible now. You breathe it in, deep, and feel the warmth slide through your chest. It's ridiculous how comforting it is, even though you haven't tasted a thing. They say, and this might just be gossip, that in these early days, the broth sometimes simmered all night, not because of tradition, but because wood was cheap at night. People whispered about certain vendors who claimed they could hear the bones crackle softly when the marrow gave up its flavor. Some historians still argue whether that was just poetic nonsense, or if vendors really believed it made a difference. You stop at the edge of a small intersection where the mist hangs low, almost like a curtain. The stones under your feet are slick, and you catch your own reflection in a puddle, just a blur, warped and shimmering, like the city itself refusing to wake up all the way. Someone coughs nearby, sharp and quick, and a flock of birds scatters from a tiled roof. The day is coming, slowly, but for now this street is still half asleep, caught between dreams and breakfast. And you stand there, hands tucked into your sleeves against the damp chill, letting the smell of pho curl around you like a blanket. Maybe you'll step closer, maybe you'll wait. But for now you just breathe, because here, in the soft gray light, the morning feels endless. You drag your feet a little as you follow the curve of the street. The The sound of your sandals soft against the waking city. The mist hasn't lifted yet. It clings to your hair, to your clothes, like a shy cat that refuses to leave you alone. And then you see them. 2 bamboo poles balanced across a narrow pair of shoulders, swaying slightly with every step. The first gunfa of the morning. The man carrying it looks older than he probably is. His skin creased from years of steam and sun. His tunic is loose, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal wiry arms. Each step is deliberate, like he's walking on tightrope, careful not to upset the 2 large baskets hanging from either end of the pole. One side carries a squat pot, blackened by soot, probably filled with broth that sloshes quietly with each movement. The other side, a neat arrangement of bowls, chopsticks, and herbs tucked into a small wooden tray. You trail behind him for a moment, hypnotized by the rhythm of the baskets bobbing up and down. The air shifts every time the pot tilts. Steam sneaks out from under the lid, giving you little bursts of that familiar smell. Star anise, beef, and something sweet, almost floral. You could follow it blindfolded if you had to. He stops suddenly, and so do you, nearly bumping into his back. He crouches down at the edge of the street, near a crumbling wall with peeling paint, and with the ease of someone who has done this 1,000 times, he lowers the guy into the ground. The pole creaks slightly as it rests, and the baskets settle into place like 2 animals curling up. The man doesn't look at you, doesn't look at anyone. He just pulls out a small clay stove from the basket, places it on the damp ground, and starts arranging charcoal with the precision of a jeweler setting gemstones. His hands are fast, sure, but there's something unhurried about him, as if he knows the city will come to him, not the other way around. You hear it before you see it. Fee, fee, fee. The sound of him blowing through a hollow bamboo tube, coaxing the charcoal to life. The glowing embers catch slowly, reluctantly, then bloom into a soft orange glow. Smoke curls upward, mixing with the mist in lazy spirals. It smells faintly bitter at first, burnt wood and damp ash. But as soon as he sets the pot on top, the scent changes, deepens. The lid lifts with a soft hiss, and steam escapes in a rush, carrying that rich, meaty perfume you've been chasing. You watch him dip a ladle into the broth, tasting it quickly, almost absent-mindedly, like a painter checking his colors before starting. His face doesn't move, no smile, no frown, just a small nod. The broth is ready. 2 women approach, their feet barely making a sound on the wet stones. They don't speak either, just squat down on their heels, pulling their shawls tighter around their shoulders. The man nods at them without lifting his eyes and begins to work. The first splash of broth into the bowl sounds louder than it should, echoing in the quiet street. A swirl of steam escapes, and for a brief moment, you see tiny droplets of fat glistening on the surface like little golden islands. He places thin slices of meat carefully on top, the heat from the broth turning the edges pink to pale brown almost instantly. You notice something strange as he works. His movements are almost ritualistic, and yet there's a hint of playfulness. When he drops the noodles into the bowl, he gives the chopsticks a little flick, sending a few strands bouncing, and you swear you see the corner of his mouth twitch, just slightly. Maybe he enjoys this more than he lets on. You crouch nearby, pretending to adjust your sandal strap, just to get closer to the smell. The herbs stacked neatly on a banana leaf look impossibly green against the gray morning. Cilantro, basil, and that sharp, peppery, saw-leaf herb. They almost sparkle when the mist catches on them. Somewhere behind you, another vendor calls out lazily, voice dragging through the air like a long yawn. But this man stays silent, focused, ladle moving in slow circles, as if stirring the city awake one bowl at a time. And here's a curious thing. Did you know that some historians still debate whether these early vendors used beef bones exclusively, or sometimes mixed in buffalo? They argue about it endlessly, pointing to scraps of old market records and faded receipts. Not that the man here cares. His broth is clearly perfect to him, and no one's going to question it at this hour. The 2 women take their bowls, crouched low, blowing gently at the steam before tasting. Their faces soften instantly, eyes half closed in quiet satisfaction. One of them murmurs something you can't hear, maybe a small compliment, maybe just a sigh of relief. The vendor doesn't react, just reaches for another bundle of noodles, ready for the next customer who will inevitably appear. You stand again, stretching your legs, and glance down the street. More figures are approaching now, drawn by the smell, by the soft promise of warmth against the damp morning. The city is still sleepy, but something about the way the steam curls upward makes you feel like it's beginning to breathe, slowly waking, one bowl of pho at a time. You shuffle closer to the sound of footsteps tapping against stone, clack, 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 sharp and precise, like a woodpecker politely knocking on a tree. It takes you a second to realize it's the sound of wooden clogs, muck, carried on the damp morning air. The street is still hazy, a dull watercolor of gray and pale brown, but that rhythm stands out, weaving through the mist like a metronome for the city's slow awakening. You turn your head and there she is, a woman gliding carefully along the uneven path, balancing a wicker basket in one hand, her gook striking with every step. She doesn't hurry. No one does at this hour. Her altouthan brushes against her ankles, slightly wet at the edges, and her scarf is tied snugly around her chin, hiding half her face from the chill. But you notice what she's carrying. Wrapped carefully in banana leaves are thin sticks of cinnamon and a little pouch of star anise, like the kind that makes pho smell like it's been kissed by a bakery. Every step she takes sends a faint creak through the wooden clogs, and somehow that sound mixes perfectly with the soft bubbling of broth from the vendor nearby. You watch her pause briefly near a gun pho, crouching to hand over her spices. The vendor, a different one from before, younger, his hair tied loosely, accepts him with a curt nod, and for a moment, the mist thickens between them as if the city itself wants to keep their little transaction secret. The cinnamon disappears into the pot almost immediately, vanishing beneath a layer of shimmering broth. A sweet, warm scent slides into the air, curling around your nose, tickling at the back of your throat. You close your eyes for a second, breathing in, and the smell is almost too rich for a morning this quiet, like someone accidentally put dessert in your soup. You crouch nearby, pretending to inspect the wet stones just to get closer. The vendor tosses a single star anise into the pot, and you watch it spin lazily, almost dancing before settling against a piece of bone. It's such a small thing, but you feel like the entire smell of the street shifts with that one move, deeper now, warmer. The woman in clogs doesn't stay. She simply nods once more and walks off, the sound of her gook fading slowly, clack, click, clack, until it's swallowed by the mist again. You find yourself listening long after she's gone, as if the rhythm itself carries the scent of the spices she left behind. The man squatting beside you slurps noisily at his bowl, and you glance at him, a little amused. The steam fogs up his face so much that he looks like a ghost enjoying breakfast. He pauses halfway through and mutters something about how the broth is sweeter than usual today. You smile to yourself, because of course it is. You saw the cinnamon go in. There's something oddly funny about how serious people are with their pho here. One guy sitting on a low wooden stool actually tilts his head sideways, sniffing his bowl like a wine critic before taking a sip. Another customer frowns, stirring his noodles carefully, as if he's trying to detect the exact ratio of spices. It's almost theatrical, but no one laughs. This is breakfast, but it's also ritual. And yet, here's a little secret. Some historians still argue whether the early vendors even used spices consistently. There are faded market records that suggest certain sellers skipped cinnamon entirely because it was too expensive. Others swear the French colonials introduced the idea of adding star anise to deepen the broth, a theory that makes traditionalists roll their eyes. The truth, probably lost in the steam a long time ago. The vendor here doesn't look like he cares about any of that. He ladles broth with the calmness of someone who knows exactly what he's doing. A splash, a swirl, a handful of thinly sliced beef that turns from pink to gray in seconds. He places a few sprigs of green onion on top, and for a brief moment, the bowl looks like a painting. White noodles, dark broth, green herbs floating like lily pads on a pond. You move a little closer to the edge of the gon, feeling the warmth radiating from the pot against your damp sleeves. The steam rises in little clouds, making the air shimmer slightly. It almost feels alive, breathing along with the city. The sun still hasn't fully risen, but the street is stirring now. Another vendor passes by with a basket of fresh herbs, and a child skips along behind him, holding what looks like a broken wooden spoon as if it's a toy sword. Somewhere further down, a dog barks once, short and sharp, then goes quiet again. And you just stand there, letting the sound of cook echo faintly in your head, even though the woman is long gone. The smell of quail and hoi still hangs in the mist, and you can't help but think it's ridiculous how something as small as a star anise can change the way an entire street feels. You drift a little further down the street, following the invisible thread of broth and smoke. And there it is, a tiny wooden table pushed against a wall stained with years of soot. An old woman crouches beside it, her back curved like the handle of a ladle, her hands moving with slow, deliberate care. She's not cooking. No, her job seems far more sacred. She's guarding something. A small clay jar filled with liquid so dark it almost looks black under the morning light. She lifts the lid just enough to peek inside, and even from where you stand, the smell cuts through the damp air. Strong, salty, deep, like the ocean shrunk into a single drop. Nook, Mum. But not just any. This is the good kind. The kind people whisper about, the kind measured in careful drops as if it's liquid gold. The old woman dips a tiny spoon into the jar, her fingers trembling slightly, and lets one perfect droplet fall into a small porcelain saucer. Plop. The sound is soft, but somehow it feels heavier than it should, like you just watched someone spend a coin. She does it again, another single drop, never rushing, as if too much at once might wake the entire street. You crouch closer, pretending to fix your sandal again because the smell is impossible to ignore. It's sharp at first, almost aggressive, then smooths into a mellow richness that makes your mouth water. But here's the thing, some people don't even taste it in the broth. It's more like a whisper, just enough to make you wonder why this bowl tastes better than the one across the street. Two men sit nearby on low stools, waiting patiently as she works. One of them leans in, squinting at the jar like he's trying to figure out exactly how much she's adding. The other just shrugs, clearly trusting the process. They don't talk. They just watch the careful ritual, the way you'd watch a master calligrapher paint a single character. She glances at them briefly, then at you, her eyes sharp but not unkind, before returning to her work. With a quick flick of her wrist, she wipes the spoon clean on a folded cloth, closes the jar with a soft thunk, and slides it back into a small wooden box. The jar disappears like a magician's prop, hidden until the next bowl demands its secret touch. You can't help but smile because it feels almost ridiculous, doesn't it? A single spoonful of fish sauce treated with more reverence than gold. And yet, people swear by it. Some even say certain vendors kept their Nook Mum recipe locked away tighter than their family heirlooms. There's a story, half rumor, half truth, about a vendor who traveled all the way to Haiphong every month just to get a specific batch, claiming the coastal air changed its taste. Historians still argue over this. Some insist the earliest pho recipes used no fish sauce at all, relying only on salt and dried shrimp for umami. Others argue the transition to proper fish sauce was inevitable as trade routes expanded. But none of that matters to the old woman here. She clearly knows what her broth needs, and no historian is going to convince her otherwise. You watch as the first bowl she's seasoned gets handed over to a waiting customer. The man takes it carefully, crouching low to blow across the surface before taking a sip. His eyes close instantly, his shoulders relaxing, and you can almost feel the warmth spread through him. It's such a tiny change, just a few drops, but it's enough to shift an ordinary bowl of soup into something that makes people hum quietly to themselves after the first bite. The old woman doesn't smile, doesn't even look at the man. She's already reaching for another bowl, repeating the process with the same precision. Drop by drop, bowl by bowl, the morning air thickens with the smell of broth, herbs, and that secret salty sweetness. You stand there, almost holding your breath as she works. It feels strange, like you're watching a secret being written in plain sight. And yet, no one says a word. The customers eat in silence, the vendor works in silence, and the only sounds are the soft clinking of chopsticks and the distant echo of footsteps approaching through the mist. You take one last deep breath, letting the scent of fish sauce mix with the lingering spices in the air. It's a quiet moment, simple and ordinary, yet you can't shake the feeling that you've just witnessed something almost ceremonial. An entire street held together by a jar of liquid that no one dares to underestimate. You move along, following the winding street as the mist begins to thin, and you catch sight of something unusual. A pair of horns hanging from a wooden post, polished smooth as if someone had been rubbing them for years. At first, you think they're decoration, but then you notice the butcher standing nearby, his cleaver resting against his shoulder, his apron stained in quiet shades of red and brown. The smell around here is heavier, meatier, like the broth before it's ever touched a spice. You feel it in your throat, rich and almost metallic. The butcher doesn't look at you. He's too busy pulling a large slab of beef across the table, the muscles catching glints of the soft gray morning light. Thin ribbons of steam rise from it, not because it's cooking, but because the air is still that cold. You pause for a moment, because it's strange to think that pho, the delicate, fragrant soup you've been smelling all morning, started here, in the hands of men like this. Before cinnamon, before fish sauce, before pretty porcelain bowls, there was just beef. Well, not always beef, actually. Here's something you might not know. In the early days, people didn't even like eating cows. Too valuable for work, too strange for daily meals. Some families whispered that eating beef brought bad luck, that it was wasteful, even disrespectful. So pho, it started differently. Some vendors actually used trow, buffalo bones, tough and lean, giving the broth a deeper, almost wild taste. The butcher here, though, clearly doesn't care for buffalo. You watch as he slices a long strip of beef with slow precision, the knife gliding as if the meat itself knows its place in history. Thin slices for thigh, thicker chunks for nam, and bones. Ah, the bones. He places them carefully in a separate basket, wiping his hands before stacking them like precious treasure. You step a little closer, pretending to admire the horns hanging from the post, and the smell of raw meat and marrow fills your nose. It's not unpleasant, just honest. It reminds you that the broth you've been chasing all morning started with these bones, stripped of their workhorse glory, simmered into something soft and welcoming. A boy runs past you carrying a wicker basket full of knobby joints, the kind you know will release that cloudy, gelatinous richness after hours of boiling. The boy trips slightly, catching himself at the last second, and the butcher barks something in a tone that's sharp but not unkind. The boy just grins, his teeth bright against the gray morning, and hurries off toward a waiting gung pho. There's a strange humor in it all, how something once considered unworthy of eating became the star of a city's mornings. You overhear two men talking near the butcher's table, their voices low. One insists that beef was introduced by French influence, that before colonial markets, no one would dream of wasting cattle like this. The other shakes his head, saying he remembers his grandfather simmering trow bones long before any Frenchman cared about Vietnamese breakfasts. Historians still debate it, of course. Some claim the very idea of beef-based pho is proof of French culinary influence blending with local ingenuity. Others argue it was inevitable. Meat became cheaper as cattle trading increased, and people simply adapted. The butcher wipes his blade clean, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He glances at the bones once more, as if checking their weight by sight alone, then sets them into another basket destined for the street vendors. You imagine those bones later, submerged in cloudy broth, their marrow softening slowly until it slips into the liquid like melted butter. You step away finally, leaving the scent of raw beef behind. But as you walk back toward the misty street lined with vendors, you can't help but think about those buffalo bones. You almost wish you could taste a bowl made with them, something wilder, earthier, closer to the first pho that ever simmered under these gray Hanoi skies. The air shifts again as you return to the main street. The broth smell overtakes the raw meat, sweet and spiced, as if the city prefers to forget the butcher's table and remember only the warmth that comes after. You breathe it in deeply, and for a brief moment, you picture that first hesitant cook dropping trow bones into a pot, not knowing he was starting a 100-year love affair with breakfast. You slow your steps as the mist curls low over the street, wrapping around your ankles like a lazy cat, and then you hear it. Soft at first, stretched thin across the air. Fa. The sound drifts down the street like a yawn given human form, drawn out, unhurried, almost comical in how little energy it carries. You follow the voice curious, and soon you spot him, a vendor standing under a sagging awning, one hand loosely holding the handle of his ladle, the other cupped around his mouth as he calls again. Fa. It's so drawn out you can almost feel his boredom vibrating through the air. But somehow it works. Heads turn, people glance up from their crouched stools. A dog even perks its ears, though it quickly loses interest and curls back into sleep. The man doesn't move much. He just leans slightly on his bamboo pole, his weight shifting lazily from one sandal to the other. His hair is tied back with a faded cloth, and his shirt hangs loose over his thin frame. He looks like he hasn't quite woken up himself, but his broth... Oh, that's awake. The steam rising from his pot twists sharply into the air, thick and confident, a complete betrayal of the vendor's sleepy tone. You step closer, careful not to slip on the wet stones, and you realize his lazy row, his street call, is deliberate. Everyone knows that voice. It drifts across the neighborhood every morning like clockwork, slow and steady, as if he's calling not just customers but the sun itself to rise. Two women approach, their steps as lazy as his voice, crouching down on tiny stools without saying a word. He glances at them briefly, doesn't smile, doesn't hurry. His ladle dips into the pot in the same slow rhythm as his call, and you swear you can almost hear the plop of noodles landing in the bowl, matching the tone of his next drawling. Pho. It's funny, really, how the entire ritual feels like a collective agreement to stay half asleep a little longer. No one rushes. The women stir their bowls gently, blowing on the steam, while he moves with the calm patience of a man who knows the morning isn't going anywhere. You crouch down near the corner of his stall, pretending to watch a stray chicken pecking at the mud, but you're really just waiting to catch another drift of his broth. It smells deeper than the others you've passed, richer somehow with that sharp edge of ginger cutting through the mist. A lazy voice, but not a lazy cook. There's a rumor whispered between customers crouched on stools that this vendor perfected his broth precisely because he refused to rush. Supposedly he lets his bones simmer for 12 hours, never stirring too quickly, never skimming too much, letting the fat rise and settle naturally. Some people think that's nonsense. Some historians even argue that slower cooking wasn't practical for vendors who needed to move constantly. But clearly he doesn't care what they think. The vendor shifts slightly, leaning one elbow against the bamboo pole, and for a moment he almost looks like he might fall asleep standing. But his ladle never misses a beat. Broth, noodles, meat, herbs, and another long, lazy call into the street. Pho up! A child giggles nearby, repeating the call in a high-pitched voice, and the vendor gives the tiniest twitch of a smile, almost like he's trying not to encourage the game. Still, the sound of the child's laughter mingles with the smell of broth, softening the quiet morning in a way that feels nice. You watch as another customer approaches, drawn in by nothing more than that sleepy voice. It's almost magical how effective it is. No shouting, no excitement, just a long sigh of a word, repeated over and over, wrapping around the street like a lullaby that somehow promises breakfast. You find yourself lingering, not even hungry, just content to stand there breathing in the steam and letting that slow rhythmic call rock you into the same easy calm that seems to hold the entire street in its grip. You wander further down the street, brushing past hanging laundry damp with mist, and then you spot them. Rows of porcelain bowls stacked neatly on a wooden crate. They're not the bright, glossy ceramic you might expect. No, these are old, heavy things, their edges chipped in places, their white glaze faded to a soft grayish cream. A thin blue line runs along the rim of each one, like a river that's been painted and repainted until it forgot its original color. The vendor crouches behind the crate, carefully wiping each bowl with a rag that looks almost as old as the bowls themselves. He doesn't rush. He rubs in slow circles, pausing now and then to hold a bowl up to the weak morning light as if checking for cracks invisible to anyone else. You pick one up when he's not looking, just to feel its weight. It's heavier than you expected, almost startlingly so, the kind of bowl that would make your wrist ache if you had to hold it too long. The glaze feels smooth but worn, the faint scratches etched across its surface like tiny roads, evidence of years of chopsticks tapping against its sides. These bowls weren't made here. No, these are imports from China, brought in long before the city thought of making its own. People whispered about how expensive they were back then, so pricey that some vendors rented them from middlemen instead of owning them outright. Imagine that, paying rent on a soup bowl. A boy runs past you carrying a stack of them, his arms trembling under the weight. He nearly trips and you hear the vendor bark something sharp, his voice cracking through the morning like a snapped twig. The boy laughs nervously and steadies himself, but you can tell from the vendor's face that a broken bowl would cost more than a week's worth of noodles. There's something oddly noble about these battered things, though. Each bowl has probably held hundreds, maybe thousands of servings of pho. Its once bright glaze now dulled by time and broth. You imagine all the mornings they've survived, all the hands that have cupped them for warmth on chilly days like this. A woman sitting nearby takes her first sip from one, holding it close to her face so the steam fogs her cheeks. She grips it with both hands, careful, reverent, almost as if she's holding a relic rather than a breakfast bowl. You can't help but notice how her fingers twitch slightly under the weight, but she doesn't complain. She just sips slowly, savoring the heat. Here's something curious. Some historians argue that the shape of these early bowls influenced the way pho was served. Their deep, narrow design kept the broth hotter for longer, forcing people to eat slowly, letting the noodles soften just right. Others dismiss that idea, claiming vendors simply used whatever was cheap and available. But looking at the way the vendor here polishes each one, you suspect it wasn't just about practicality. These bowls were part of the experience. The vendor places another freshly cleaned bowl onto the stack with a soft thunk, and you watch as he runs his thumb along the blue rim, almost absent-mindedly. Maybe he's checking for cracks, or maybe he's just used to the feel of it, the way you'd get used to the weight of a favorite pen. A little girl crouched beside her mother drums lightly on her bowl with her chopsticks, giggling at the hollow sound it makes. The vendor glances at her sharply, and she stops instantly, tucking her hands under her knees. You smile because you understand. The bowls aren't just dishes, they're investments, almost fragile partners in this quiet morning business. You set the one you're holding back onto the crate, careful not to make a sound. For a moment you run your fingers over the faded blue rim, wondering how many mornings it has seen, how many pairs of tired eyes stared into its depths before taking that first comforting sip of broth. And then, as the vendor lifts another bowl to polish, the steam from his pot drifts over the stack, curling softly around the porcelain like an affectionate ghost, as if even the broth itself remembers these old heavy bowls and trusts them to keep its warmth a little longer. You slip back into the narrow lane where the roofs dip low and the air feels thicker, heavier with the weight of smoke. The mist that followed you all morning has tangled itself with the black, lazy curls rising from a dozen tiny stoves. Here, the street narrows so much you can stretch your arms out and almost touch both sides, your fingers brushing damp bamboo walls stained a deep charcoal gray. You cough lightly, not from the cold, but from the smoke that hangs stubbornly under the low eaves. It smells of burning wood and old grease, but beneath that sharpness, there's the softer, richer scent of broth struggling to rise through the haze. The roofs here aren't tiles like the main street, just thatched palm leaves, their edges singed in places, blackened by years of morning fires. Some pieces droop low as if weighed down by the memory of every bowl of pho ever cooked beneath them. You stop under one of these sagging roofs, leaning slightly against a bamboo pole to watch the scene. A vendor crouches by a clay stove, his head bent so low it nearly touches the pot. His hair is shiny with sweat despite the chill, and his shirt clings damply to his back. He tosses another stick of wood into the fire, and sparks leap up, briefly lighting his face in warm orange. For a second, he looks almost like a soldier tending to a battlefield fire, grim, focused, unbothered by the smoke curling into his eyes. The broth bubbles angrily, splattering tiny droplets onto the soot-darkened wall behind him. He doesn't flinch. He just stirs slowly, letting the liquid roll over itself, releasing that familiar fragrance in slow waves that somehow manage to cut through the choking smoke. You inhale, ignoring the sting in your nose, because here, buried under all this, is the heart of pho, the stubbornness to keep it simmering even when your lungs complain. A child crouched nearby waves a hand dramatically in front of his face, pretending to fight off the smoke like it's a monster. The vendor glances at him and gives a short laugh, so quick and low you almost miss it. It's rare to hear laughter in these cramped corners where mornings feel more like work than ritual. You run your fingers lightly along the bamboo wall beside you. It's sticky with years of steam and grease, as if the very buildings have been marinated by the smell of pho. There's something oddly comforting about it, like the walls themselves are seasoned, part of the recipe in some secret way. And here's a strange bit of history for you. Some people claim that pho tasted different depending on where it was cooked, not just because of the water or spices, but because of the smoke trapped under these thatched roofs. Historians still argue about that, of course. Some laugh at the idea, calling it superstition, while others point to stories of vendors refusing to move stalls even when offered better spots, swearing that the air in their corner of the street gave the broth its soul. The vendor here certainly seems to believe it. He leans closer to the fire, fanning it gently with a woven bamboo sheet, careful not to let the flames jump too high. The smoke coils around him like a loyal pet, refusing to leave. Every now and then, he tilts the lid of the pot just enough to release a thick puff of steam, almost as if he's letting the street breathe with him. You shuffle a little further in, ducking under a low-hanging piece of roof that drips cold water onto your shoulder. The droplets sizzle slightly as they hit the stove, disappearing in tiny bursts. The sound is almost satisfying, like the street itself is quietly participating in the cooking. A woman seated on a low stool blows across her bowl, the steam rising to mix with the black haze overhead. Her hair smells faintly of smoke when she shifts beside you, and she laughs softly to herself, muttering about how her husband complains every time she comes home smelling like a kitchen. She doesn't seem to care, though. Her face softens as she takes her first sip. You linger there longer than you mean to, letting the warmth of the stove push back the damp chill that's been clinging to your clothes all morning. The smoke scratches your throat a little, but you don't move. There's something strangely peaceful in standing here, half hidden under a roof stained with history, watching a pot of pho bubble away like it's been doing the same thing for 100 years. And maybe it has. You step out from under the low thatched roof, blinking as the mist opens up into a slightly wider street. The air is clearer here, washed gently by a breeze carrying something faintly different, not just the usual beef and spice, but a curious sharpness, almost buttery. You follow it, your sandals slapping quietly against the damp stones until you spot him, a man who doesn't belong to this street at all. He sits stiffly on a wooden stool that looks far too small for him, his long legs folded awkwardly, his polished leather boots leaving neat wet marks on the ground. A Frenchman. His coat, even in this morning fog, looks pressed and clean, though a fine sheen of steam has already settled on his mustache. He's holding a porcelain spoon with 2 fingers, like he's afraid of touching it too much, and staring at the bowl in front of him as though it might suddenly explain itself. You crouch near a low wall to watch. His face is unreadable at first, but when he finally dips the spoon into the broth and tastes it, his eyebrows lift just slightly. Not much, but enough. His lips move, muttering something under his breath that you can't catch, though the vendor beside him glances up briefly unimpressed. He takes another spoonful, slower this time, blowing on it carefully before sipping, and then he smiles. Not the polite, tight smile of someone humoring local cuisine, but a genuine, quiet one. He leans closer to the bowl, inspecting it, watching the thin slices of beef swirl lazily as if trying to figure out how something so simple could taste this good. A woman crouched beside him snickers softly, trying to hide her amusement behind her chapsticks. The Frenchman notices but doesn't look offended. Instead, he picks up the chapsticks clumsily and fumbling with them like a child learning to hold a pencil for the first time. His first attempt fails, noodles sliding back into the bowl with a soft splash. A bit of broth lands on his coat, leaving a dark spot he doesn't seem to care about. Finally, after a few awkward tries, he manages to lift a bundle of noodles, his fingers stiff with concentration. He leans forward, slurps carefully, though still too loudly for local etiquette, and laughs quietly at himself. Shaking his head, here's something amusing. There's a story whispered among old vendors that French officials at first dismissed pho as just soup. But after trying it, some supposedly started sending their cooks to secretly watch local vendors prepare it, trying to recreate the broth back in their kitchens. Historians argue about this, of course. Some say it's just a myth to flatter local pride. Others believe it, citing old letters describing a morning beef noodle broth better than any consommé. The Frenchman here seems like proof enough. He leans back, speaking to himself in French, something soft and almost affectionate, and then gestures for another bowl. The vendor raises an eyebrow, clearly amused, but obliges, ladling more broth with practiced ease. You watch as the Frenchman, now a little braver, sprinkles fresh herbs into his second bowl, his expression curious, almost reverent. He smells them first, basil, saw-leaf herb, nodding slightly before stirring them in. When he tastes the broth again, his face softens completely. He closes his eyes for a brief moment, like someone listening to a favorite song. Around him, no one pays much attention anymore. The locals are too busy with their own bowls, their quiet slurping and soft murmurs filling the air. But you keep watching, because there's something almost poetic about this stiff foreigner surrendering to a bowl of pho like everyone else, forgetting his boots, his coat, his manners. When he finally puts the spoon down, he sighs softly, steam curling around his face, and mutters something you catch this time, even through his accent. Better than soup. Much better. The vendor doesn't respond, he just ladles another bowl for someone else, his face as unreadable as ever. But you notice, just barely, the corner of his mouth twitch upward, like even he can't help but feel a little proud. You turn away at last, letting the soft hum of voices and the clink of porcelain follow you as you walk. The breeze carries the smell of broth and herbs past your face, and you smile faintly. Funny, isn't it? A man from half a world away, sitting awkwardly on a wooden stool, slurping pho like a local. Maybe that's how a city wins hearts, one quiet bowl at a time. You follow the curve of the street, stepping over a shallow puddle that reflects crooked rooftops, and the smell shifts again. Lighter now, almost grassy. It leads you to a corner where a young girl squats beside a basket filled to the brim with bright green stalks, their thin blades glistening with morning dew. She plucks through them quickly, tossing aside any yellowing pieces, her fingers moving so fast they blur. You crouch near her, pretending to tie your sandal pad, and the scent of fresh onion hits you. Sharp at first, then sweet as it lingers. It's strange how such a simple thing, just a handful of chopped han la, can make a bowl of pho feel alive. The vendor behind her ladles broth into a bowl, his face serious as he sprinkles a measured pinch of green onion on top. It doesn't look like much, just a few floating bits. But you notice how every customer leans in closer when that handful lands, their noses twitching slightly. A man sitting nearby mutters to himself, "Lucky they still have Hain today," and you tilt your head, curious. The girl laughs softly at his comment, not looking up from her basket, and shakes her head. You think this is lucky. You should have seen last year. She's right. There was a time, not too long ago, when these bright green stalks were more expensive than the meat in the bowl. You've heard the stories, people lining up at dawn just to get a small bundle, vendors limiting how much each customer could sprinkle. Some even charged extra just for a spoonful of chopped green onion. A rumor once spread, half silly, half true, that green onion brought luck, especially when eaten early in the morning. Some families sent their children to stand in line just to secure a single bunch for New Year's Day. Historians still argue over whether the shortage was due to bad weather or just high demand, but everyone agrees on one thing. Pho without Hain was considered incomplete. The vendor here clearly understands that. He takes his time arranging the garnish, as if placing jewels on a crown. A woman slurping her noodles watches him impatiently, muttering under her breath. But when she finally gets her bowl, the first thing she does is breathe in deeply, eyes closing for just a second as the steam carries that fresh, peppery scent straight to her nose. You glance back at the girl sorting through her basket. She hums quietly to herself, her fingers never stopping, pulling away wilted stalks, wiping fresh ones gently with a damp cloth. There's pride in her work, even though she doesn't look up once. You step closer to the vendor's table, careful not to get in the way, and peer into the pot just as he drops another handful of green onion into the broth itself. The smell rises immediately, sharper now, filling the air around you. For a moment, you can almost taste it, the way the sweetness of the broth will catch that onion's bite and carry it to the back of your throat. A boy sitting on a stool near you dips his chopsticks into his bowl and pulls out a single long stalk, holding it up proudly before slurping it whole, grinning as if he's won something. His mother scolds him softly, but he just laughs, green flecks clinging to his lips. You can't help but smile too, because it's ridiculous how much weight this garnish carries. Just a handful of chopped green onion, and yet it can change the entire feel of a bowl. The vendor sprinkles another careful pinch into the next bowl, the green bright against the pale noodles, and for a brief moment the entire street smells fresh again, as if the morning itself just woke up a little more. You stand slowly, stepping back into the mist, letting the scent of fresh onion trail behind you. It's funny, isn't it? 100 years of pho, and still people argue about the meat, the spices, the broth. But one thing is certain, no one forgets the green onion. You move further along the street, and the air changes again, cooler, wetter. The ground beneath your sandals feels soft, almost spongy, and when you glance down, you see why. Last night's rain still lingers here, turning the dirt roads into a patchwork of muddy puddles. Each step makes a quiet squelch, the sound almost embarrassing in the still morning. The path narrows, squeezed between two leaning walls, and you have to balance carefully as you walk, hopping from one slightly dry patch of stone to another. A man in front of you isn't as careful. He stomps through the mud carelessly, sending little arcs of brown water splattering against the wall. You instinctively step back, shielding yourself, because the last thing you want is to splash mud onto the steaming pots of pho lined neatly along the edge of the street. One vendor crouched beside his stove shoots the man a sharp look, his ladle frozen midair as if warning him not to take another step closer. The man mutters something apologetically and then sidesteps quickly, his feet squelching with each move. You can't help but smirk. It's almost funny how a single splash of mud feels like a bigger crime than being late to work. You edge closer to a pot sitting dangerously close to the puddles and steam swirling gently upward, untouched by the damp chaos below. The vendor has built a little wall of flat stones around it, creating a makeshift barrier to keep stray water away. His care is obvious. Every few seconds, he glances down at the ground, as if expecting the mud itself to creep closer. The smell here is different, softer, maybe because of the rain. The broth's aroma seems diluted slightly by the damp air, mixing with the earthy scent of wet soil. You crouch near the edge of a puddle, watching as the reflection of the vendor's stove flickers in the water, distorted by tiny ripples whenever someone steps too close. There's a certain quietness to this corner, broken only by the soft slurp of noodles and the occasional sound of sandals sticking to the mud with a gentle pop. A woman squatting on a stool adjusts her skirt carefully, keeping it from touching the wet ground, and sighs in relief when the vendor hands her a bowl. She lifts it with both hands, her face relaxing instantly as the warmth of the porcelain cuts through the morning chill. You take another cautious step, the mud sucking slightly at your sandal, and glance at the people sitting close together on low stools, their toes barely avoiding the puddles. There's a strange kind of intimacy here, everyone eating so close to the wet ground, hunched over their bowls as if protecting them from the dirty splash of the street. And here's something curious. Some old stories say that in the early 1900s, vendors would refuse to serve pho on particularly muddy mornings, claiming the broth tasted wrong if cooked in heavy rain. Historians still debate whether that was superstition or just a convenient excuse to take a day off. Looking at this vendor carefully, shielding his stove from the damp, you can almost believe the superstition was real. A boy runs past you, laughing as he hops over a puddle, only to land too close to a vendor's pot. A splash of muddy water jumps up, stopping just short of the stove. The vendor's head snaps up instantly, his eyes narrowing, and the boy freezes mid-step before darting away, giggling nervously. You crouch lower, watching the vendor wipe a small splash off the stone barrier with a rag, muttering something under his breath. There's a kind of reverence here, a quiet understanding that the broth deserves better than muddy water mixing with its steam. The rain-damp air clings to your clothes, heavier than before, but you don't move away. You stay crouched near the puddle, watching as the steam from the pot rises into the cool mist, untouched, pure, like a stubborn little miracle against the wet, messy street. For a moment, you feel a strange kind of respect, not just for the foe, but for the people guarding it, even here, where every step risks sinking you ankle deep into mud. It's ridiculous, maybe, to care so much about a bowl of soup on a morning like this. But then again, isn't that exactly why you're here, standing in wet sandals, breathing in the smell of broth and rain? You ease out of the muddy stretch and into a wider road where the sound changes. Not the quiet slurp of noodles now, but the rhythmic creak of wheels rolling over wet stones. You glance up, and there they are. A line of Zeikeo rickshaws parked neatly along the side of the street, their drivers hunched in their seats like tired cats waiting for the sun to warm them. The smell of pho is still here, curling lazily into the cool morning air, but now it mingles with the faint scent of damp leather and wet wood. One driver leans back against his seat, hat tipped low over his eyes, pretending to nap, but you notice his nose twitching every time a puff of broth-scented steam drifts past. A vendor nearby has set his gun right next to the line of rickshaws, his pot balanced carefully on a low wooden frame. Smart move. Drivers waiting for passengers always have time for breakfast. You watch as one of them, a wiry man with a towel draped around his neck, steps off his rickshaw and crouches on a tiny stool, rubbing his cold hands together while waiting for his bowl. The vendor works quickly, ladling broth and tossing noodles with a practiced rhythm. The driver glances nervously at his empty rickshaw every few seconds, as if afraid a customer might appear before he finishes eating. You notice something funny. The drivers eat in a strange crouched position, half sitting, half ready to leap back into their rickshaws at a moment's notice. One man even keeps his hands positioned as if holding imaginary handles, his chopsticks moving clumsily as he slurps. It's almost comical, like they're racing even when they're sitting still. But there was a time when this wasn't just funny, it was illegal. You've heard the stories. A short-lived city rule once banned rickshaw drivers from eating pho while waiting in line, claiming it blocked the road and encouraged laziness. Some historians still debate whether the rule was ever enforced seriously or was just a threat to keep the streets moving. Most drivers ignored it anyway, sneaking bowls behind their rickshaws when no one was looking. The driver closest to you slurps loudly, blowing on his broth between bites, his eyes darting to the street every time a wheel creaks in the distance. He eats fast, almost too fast, noodles dangling from his mouth as he shoves the bowl closer for another sip. The vendor watches him with mild amusement, shaking his head slightly as if to say, "Slow down, no one's stealing your passengers." Another driver laughs quietly, teasing him, "Eat slower, or you'll choke before you even get paid today." The first man waves him off, muttering something through a mouthful of noodles, clearly unwilling to waste even a second on conversation. The broth here smells stronger, richer, maybe because the vendor keeps his fire higher than most, rushing to serve customers who can't linger. The steam rises in heavy clouds, rolling past the wooden wheels of the rickshaws, curling around their handles like lazy snakes. A young boy runs up suddenly, tapping one of the drivers on the shoulder and pointing toward a waiting customer further down the road. The driver sets his bowl down so fast, you'd think it burned him. Wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and leaps into his rickshaw, his towel flapping behind him as he sprints away. His bowl sits abandoned, broth still steaming, a few noodles sliding back into the soup with a soft plop. The vendor shakes his head again, picks up the half-finished bowl, and sets it carefully aside, maybe for the driver to reclaim later. The other rickshaw men laugh, shaking their heads, but they don't stop eating. You stand a little longer, watching the steam rise past the rickshaws lined neatly in a row, their drivers crouched low, eating as if every bite has to be stolen before the morning gets busy. There's something almost endearing about it, this quiet, hurried dance between hunger and work. You step away finally, the sound of wheels creaking behind you as another driver leaves, and for a brief second you wonder if pho tastes different when eaten this way. Half sitting, half ready to run, with the scent of wet wood and leather mixing with the steam. Maybe it does. Maybe that's why these men risked breaking city rules just for one hot bowl before the day began. You wander past the line of rickshaws following the street as it bends gently, and then you stop, because here the air smells different, sharper, rawer, almost electric, as if the broth itself is alive. You turn your head, searching, and there it is, a vendor lifting a thin slice of beef so pink it almost glows in the gray morning light. He holds it between a pair of long wooden chopsticks, dipping it just barely into the steaming broth. The meat trembles, edges curling slightly as the heat licks at it. It's mesmerizing, you can't look away. The moment the beef touches the surface, it seems to dance, wriggling gently as if trying to escape the heat before surrendering completely, turning from translucent pink to soft, muted brown in seconds. The vendor works fast, almost playful with his timing, pulling the meat out at just the right moment, placing it gently on top of the noodles. It's like watching a magician. 1 second it's raw, the next it's perfectly cooked, all without ever boiling. You crouch closer, fascinated, and the smell of fresh beef mixes with the deeper, bone-rich aroma of the broth. It's a contrast you can almost taste just by breathing. Clean, metallic sweetness against slow-cooked richness. A man sitting on a low stool beside you notices your stare and laughs quietly. First time seeing thieat thai, he teases, lifting a slice from his own bowl and letting it dangle for you to see. The steam curls around it like a curtain before he slurps it into his mouth, grinning as he chews. There's something almost scandalous about how delicate it looks, this raw beef barely kissed by heat. And here's a fun rumor. People used to whisper that eating thieat thai would keep you young, that the barely cooked meat carried some secret strength from the animal itself. Historians, of course, argue about that. Some call it nonsense, a superstition born from vanity. Others claim the belief came from old herbal medicine, where lightly cooked meat was considered warmer and better for blood circulation. The vendor doesn't seem to care about myths. He's too busy tending to his meat like a jeweler setting diamonds. Each slice is cut paper thin, stacked neatly on a wooden tray beside him. He moves with such precision you can tell he's done this thousands of times. Dip, swirl, lift, place. Always in that order, always perfect. A little boy sitting with his mother pokes curiously at the raw slices in his bowl, hesitant. His mother leans down, whispering something reassuring, and helps him scoop a piece into his spoon. The boy slurps it carefully, his eyes widening just slightly before he grins, nodding at her. You shift to get a better look at the vendor's pot, watching as another slice of raw beef slides under the surface, now disappearing into a swirl of steam. It's almost funny, isn't it? The broth has been simmering for hours, heavy with bones and spices, and yet it treats the beef so gently, cooking it just enough to keep it soft. Another customer leans forward, asking for extra thieat thai, and the vendor obliges, his movements as calm as ever. You watch as he layers the slices carefully, almost artfully, letting the heat of the broth do the work. It's such a small detail, but it feels like the very heart of pho, trusting the soup itself to finish what the cook started. The smell grows stronger as he lifts another slice, the steam catching the faint metallic sweetness of fresh beef. You inhale deeply, letting it fill your lungs, and for a brief second, you can almost feel the texture on your tongue. Silky, tender, almost melting. You linger a moment longer, crouched near the edge of his stall, watching the quiet dance of raw meat and boiling broth. And as you finally step away, the vendor dips another slice with that same careful rhythm, as if he knows each piece isn't just food, it's a tiny performance, and the street is his silent, hungry audience. You follow the steady rhythm of boiling pots until the street opens into a wider crossroad where the air feels almost argumentative. Not loud, not angry, but charged in a way that makes you slow your steps. And then you hear it, two vendors crouched opposite each other, their voices raised just enough to carry through the mist. No, more. Quay, one insists, his hands slicing through the air as if physically weighing cinnamon sticks. Ridiculous. The other shoots back, fanning his stove with sharp, annoyed flicks. Too much quay and it's not pho, it's dessert. You need hoi. Proper hoi. You crouch near a stack of empty baskets, pretending to rest, but really you're eavesdropping because this is the kind of argument that keeps entire streets entertained. Their voices bounce between the stalls, pulling glances from customers hunched over their bowls who slurp a little slower now, waiting to see who wins this morning's spice debate. The first vendor, a tall man with rolled-up sleeves and soot-streaked arms, gestures toward his pot, which gives off a sharp, sweet fragrance. Smell that? Clean, warm, not heavy. Cinnamon is morning food. Always too strong, it lingers like an unwelcome guest. The second vendor, older with a thin mustache and a ladle clutched like a weapon, snorts. Your broth smells like tea. Pho needs depth. Without Hoi, it's just boiled beef pretending to be something fancy. He lifts his lid briefly, releasing a wave of darker, richer steam that rolls across the street, heavy with licorice-like sweetness. You can't help but smile because, honestly, both smell incredible. The first broth is bright and almost cheerful, while the second feels heavier, like it's been simmering in secret for days. Two women crouch nearby, glance at each other, whispering as they eat. One murmurs, "I like cinnamon more. Always sticks to your mouth too long." The other shakes her head, sucking a noodle into her bowl. No, Pho is Hoi. Otherwise, you might as well drink plain broth. And here's the thing, this isn't just street gossip. Historians still argue about it too. Some say early Pho leaned heavily on kueh, borrowing from old Chinese medicinal soups, while others swear that the distinct star anise kick defined Hanoi Pho from the very beginning. Old recipe scraps don't help, they're vague, often just scribbled as spices to taste. The tall vendor glances at the older man, smirking slightly. Funny, isn't it? You talk about Hoi like you invented it, but too much and it kills the beef. Cinnamon lets the meat speak. The older man's mustache twitches as he replies, voice smooth but sharp. Your meat doesn't need to speak. It needs to listen to the spices, otherwise why bother with broth at all? You almost laugh aloud, but you bite your lip, keeping still. The argument feels less like anger and more like a performance. Two masters defending their craft, neither willing to admit the other has a point. Meanwhile, customers keep eating, quietly choosing sides with every bite. One man leans back, sighing happily after finishing his bowl at the cinnamon vendor's stall, while another slurps loudly across the road, nodding in approval at the heavier star anise broth. A breeze shifts, carrying both scents toward you at once. Sharp cinnamon mixing with the deep sweetness of star anise, twirling together in the cool morning air like two dancers refusing to let go of each other. You take a deep breath, letting both smells fill your chest, and you wonder, does it really matter which is right? Maybe. Pho has always been about these arguments, about people caring so much that they'll spend an entire morning defending the balance of spices. The two vendors keep talking, voices dropping slightly now, though you catch the younger one chuckling under his breath, almost good-naturedly. The older man snorts again, but hides a smile behind his ladle. You stand slowly, letting the fragrant air follow you as you move on. Behind you, the debate continues, softening into quiet grumbles, and you think to yourself, amused, a century later, people will probably still be arguing about kueh and Hoi, because maybe that's the real secret to Pho's soul. You turn into a quieter lane, leaving the spice argument behind, and here the air feels softer, calmer, almost melancholy. The street is narrow, shaded by crooked wooden balconies that lean over as if trying to eavesdrop on the world below. And there, sitting at a low bamboo table by himself, is a man who looks entirely out of place among the morning bustle. He's young, though his face carries the weight of someone who thinks too much. His out-eye is neat but slightly wrinkled as if he slept in it. His hair falls into his eyes and his fingers drum lightly on the table, tapping out a rhythm only he seems to hear. A notebook lies open beside him, its pages speckled with ink stains and half-finished lines of poetry. You stop just far enough away not to disturb him, crouching near a pile of empty baskets because something about the way he's staring at his bowl of pho feels different. He's not eating quickly, not even lifting his chopsticks yet. Instead, he leans over it, breathing in the steam, eyes half closed as if he's memorizing the smell. The broth curls around his face in soft ribbons, catching the morning light. He smiles faintly, almost shyly, before finally picking up his chopsticks and stirring the noodles gently, as if afraid to disturb the broth too much. A woman at the next table glances at him curiously, whispering to her friend, "That's the poet, isn't it? The one who writes about everything?" Her friend shrugs, too busy eating to care. But you've heard about him before, an eccentric who once claimed that pho was the only true poem the city ever wrote. As he eats, he pauses now and then to jot something in his notebook, tapping the end of his brush against his chin. A tiny smile flickers on his lips each time he writes, and you wonder what words are spilling onto the page right now. There's an old story about him, whispered by vendors who still remember. They say he once traded a morning's worth of poems for a free bowl of pho, scribbling verses on scraps of paper and handing them to amused customers. Some of those scraps survived yellowed, folded carefully in kitchen drawers. Others were lost to time, used to wrap herbs, or simply thrown away. Historians still argue whether his famous Bowl of Dawn poem was truly inspired by pho, or if that's just a romantic exaggeration people added later. The man here doesn't seem to care about legends. He lifts a spoonful of broth, sipping it slowly, closing his eyes as if tasting each word before writing it down. His hand moves quickly across the page, and for a moment you can almost hear the lines forming in your own head. Something about steam curling like dreams, about noodles drifting like lazy rivers, about the way the broth holds a whole city in its warmth. A child crouched nearby watches him curiously, giggling when the poet's glasses fog up from the steam. The man glances at the boy, smiles, and pushes the glasses up his nose, leaving a faint streak of broth on the frame. He doesn't bother to wipe it away. You linger a moment longer, watching him pause, mid-bite, to scribble another thought, his bowl forgotten for long stretches as the words take over. The noodles swell slightly in the broth, but he doesn't seem to mind. Maybe for him the pho isn't just food, it's a muse, something to be savored in every sense, every possible way. As you step away, you glance back one last time. The poet leans over his bowl again, eyes distant, pen scratching softly against paper. The steam rises between him and the world like a thin veil, and you can't help but think, maybe he's right. Maybe pho is the city's poem, written fresh every morning in bowls like this, waiting for someone patient enough to read it. The lane narrows again, dipping into a quieter stretch where the mist hangs low and stubborn, heavy with the scent of wood smoke. You take a step and then another, and the sound of coughing reaches you before the smell does. Sharp, dry, the kind of cough that scrapes a throat, used to smoke-filled mornings. You follow the sound and find a small cluster of people hunched around a vendor's pot. The air so thick with gray smoke it stings your eyes. The clay stove spits out lazy coils of soot, curling toward the sagging roof of palm leaves above. You take a cautious breath, the smoky air clinging to your tongue, and you can almost feel it sitting heavy in your chest. An old man squats beside the stove, wrapped in a faded scarf, coughing into his sleeve. His eyes water, but he doesn't move away, not even an inch. He just waits patiently for his bowl, eyes fixed on the swirling steam as if nothing else matters. Beside him, a woman fans the smoke away from her face with one hand, muttering something about how this will ruin my voice for the day, though she doesn't leave either. The vendor, a small woman with strong arms, doesn't even flinch at the smoke burning her own eyes. She stirs the broth with slow, practiced motions, blinking through the haze as if she's long stopped noticing it. Her ladle moves steadily, and the steam rising from the pot glows faintly golden against the gray backdrop of soot. You crouch low, letting the warmth of the stove reach your damp sleeves, and you can't help but notice how the smoke sticks to everything. Your hair, your clothes, even your breath. It's almost suffocating, yet the smell of pho still pushes through, stubborn and comforting, like a soft voice humming beneath the roar of the fire. A man sitting on a low stool nearby laughs hoarsely after another coughing fit, his voice rasping as he tells the woman next to him, "We complain, but we always come back." She nods, smiling wryly before taking another slow sip from her bowl. There's a rumor about this particular corner, one you've heard whispered before. People used to joke that you could taste the smoke in the broth. Some even claimed the extra layer of soot somehow deepened the flavor, giving it a darker, almost roasted note. Historians still argue about that. Some call it a romanticized myth, while others cite old recipes that specifically mention smoke-scorched bones for stronger broth. You watch as the vendor adjusts a piece of burning wood with a pair of long tongues, sending a puff of ash swirling into the air. A child coughs dramatically nearby, his mother patting his back while holding his bowl steady. The vendor glances up, a flicker of concern in her eyes, but says nothing. She just stirs again, letting the fire crackle and spit beneath her pot. The broth bubbles thickly, sending little bursts of fat shimmering to the surface. and the smell shifts each time. Smoke, meat, spices, then smoke again, all tangled into one. You lean closer, inhaling deeply despite the sting in your nose, because there's something strangely addictive about it, almost hypnotic. A young man sitting cross-legged on the ground blows gently on his noodles, his hair sticking out at odd angles from the humidity. Between sips, he mutters with a grin, "My wife hates the smell, says I stink like a kitchen all day after I eat here." He doesn't sound sorry at all. If anything, he sounds proud, as if wearing the scent of smoke is a badge of honor. You stay crouched for a while, letting the warmth seep into you, your eyes watering slightly from the sting of the fire. There's a quiet determination in this corner, a kind of shared acceptance. The coughs, the watering eyes, the lingering smell on clothes. They're just part of the ritual, a price no one seems unwilling to pay. As you stand to leave, you glance back one last time. The vendor is still stirring, unfazed, her silhouette framed by the glowing orange embers. The smoke curls around her like a familiar old friend, and you think maybe that's why people keep coming back. Not just for the taste, but for this feeling, the warmth, the discomfort, the undeniable proof that someone stood here in the smoke, morning after morning, just to make it perfect. The street narrows again as you follow the uneven stones, and soon the smell of smoke softens into something faintly metallic, almost coin-like. You glance down, and there on a wooden mat spread over the damp ground, an old woman is crouched with a small cloth bag at her side, her fingers moving quickly through a pile of dull, round coins. Her hands are quick despite her age, flipping each dongkem, zinc coins worn smooth by years of use, before dropping them into a small ceramic bowl beside her. A line of customers waits nearby, crouched low on their stools, some holding their own tiny stacks of coins, shifting them nervously from palm to palm. The soft clink of metal against porcelain feels almost louder than the bubbling pots behind her. You crouch closer, pretending to adjust your sandal, and the old woman glances at you briefly, her eyes sharp as she counts out change for a young boy holding an empty bowl. He hands her 2 worn coins, each with a hole punched in the center, and she squints at them before nodding curtly and pushing his bowl toward the vendor's pot. A man in line sighs impatiently, muttering under his breath. She counts like every dong is gold, but no one argues. In this part of the street, everyone knows her. She's not just handling money, she's keeping the system running, making sure no one cheats, no one leaves without paying. You glance at the coins in her bowl, noticing the thin layer of greenish rust on some of them, the way others are chipped around the edges. It's strange to think these battered little pieces of metal are all that stand between someone and a hot breakfast. And here's something odd you've heard before. Some vendors back then accepted temthu postage stamps as payment when coins ran short. A strange barter, really, but it worked. Stamps were small, easy to trade, and people trusted their value. Historians still debate whether that practice was common or just a desperate response during shortages, but you like to imagine a vendor tucking away a little stack of stamps beside his herbs, waiting to trade them later. The old woman here, though, clearly prefers coins. She picks one up, biting it lightly as if testing its authenticity before dropping it back in the bowl with a soft thunk. Her expression never changes, not even when a young man tries to slip in a cracked, nearly useless coin. She catches it instantly, sliding it back toward him without a word, her eyebrows lifting just slightly in silent disapproval. He grins sheepishly and pulls out another coin from his sleeve. The vendor ladles broth as all this unfolds, not once glancing at the exchange. It's a quiet system, smooth, practiced. The coins clink, the broth bubbles, and bowls move down the line one by one like a slow, patient assembly. A woman crouched nearby whispers to her daughter, showing her a particularly shiny coin. "This one's lucky," she says softly, slipping it back into her pocket. Maybe it's just superstition, but you've heard people say certain coins bring better broth, as if luck could somehow change the flavor. You shift to get a better view of the steaming bowls being handed over, each one balanced carefully in exchange for those tiny bits of metal. It's almost poetic in its simplicity, coins for warmth, rust for comfort. The old woman finally leans back, counting the morning's collection with a quiet hum, stacking the coins in neat little towers. The sound of metal scraping softly against metal feels almost soothing, blending into the low murmur of customers slurping nearby. You stand to leave, stepping carefully around the mat so you don't knock over her stacks, and glance back one last time. She's still there, head bent, her fingers moving with the same relentless precision. And you think, maybe this too is part of the foe's history. Not just the broth or the spices, but the clink of old coins traded every morning. Tiny, worn-out promises exchanged for the comfort of a single bowl. You leave the quiet clinking of coins behind, stepping into a narrow alley where the smell of damp charcoal hits you before you even see the stove. The air is thicker here, heavier, and every breath carries a faint dusty taste, like the inside of an old wooden chest. And then you see it, a clay stove crouched under a low awning, blackened with years of fire, its sides streaked with ash. A man kneels in front of it, his hands stained gray, his brow furrowed in concentration. The pot above him simmers steadily, sending lazy curls of steam into the air, but his attention is fixed on something else entirely, the fire. The charcoal in the stove looks damp, darker than usual, and it smokes in short, irritated bursts instead of burning clean. The man mutters under his breath, turning one piece over with a long iron tongue, frowning as if scolding it. Beside him, an open basket reveals the culprit, lumpy pieces of coal still shiny with leftover rain. You crouch nearby, pretending to inspect a crack in the stone pavement, but really, you're watching the man fight with his stove. He picks up a piece of damp charcoal, rubs it in his palm as if hoping to dry it with sheer willpower, and drops it back in with a soft thud. The fire sputters in protest, and a puff of smoke rushes out, catching you in the throat. You cough lightly, stepping back, but the man doesn't even look up. His whole world right now is that stubborn fire. He blows through a bamboo tube, long and steady, cheeks puffing out with effort. The smoke swirls upward, filling the air with that bitter, wet smell. But you notice something else too, a faint, rich undertone as the fire catches, just for a second. The broth responds instantly, bubbling a little harder, as if cheering him on. There's a story you've heard before, whispered among vendors who pride themselves on their patience. Real pho, they say, isn't just about spices or bones, it's about controlling the fire. Some even claimed that a vendor's reputation rose or fell, depending on how well they kept their stove alive on damp mornings. Historians still debate whether this obsession with fire control was exaggerated, but watching this man, you can believe every word. A woman sitting nearby slurps from her bowl, glancing at him with mild amusement. You talk to that fire like it's your child, she teases. He doesn't look at her. He doesn't look at us. Another steady stream of air through the bamboo tube. If the fire dies, the foe dies, he says simply, his voice calm but certain. The woman laughs but doesn't argue. She just keeps eating, blowing gently on her noodles. The man adjusts the charcoal again, finally finding a piece dry enough to catch. It glows faintly red, then orange, and slowly, the other pieces around it begin to burn, sending up a steadier stream of heat. The smoke thins slightly, replaced by the richer, more comforting smell of proper cooking. He leans back, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of ash across his cheek. For the first time, he smiles, a small, private smile meant only for himself. You take a slow breath, letting the warmth from the newly revived fire reach you, and you notice how the broth changes too. The steam rises more confidently now, thicker, carrying that familiar deep beef aroma with it. A boy crouched beside his mother points at the stove, why doesn't he just use dry wood instead? His mother chuckles softly, because real pho isn't lazy, Khan. Anyone can boil bones, but not everyone can coax a fire to behave. You linger for another moment, watching the man tend his stubborn charcoal like a parent soothing a restless child. The alley feels warmer now, the bitter smell of wet coal slowly replaced by the sweet, savory breath of the broth. And as you step away, you can't help but think that maybe pho owes as much to these quiet, patient battles with fire as it does to the bones and spices everyone talks about. 100 years of mornings, and the story always starts here, with someone crouched by a stove, refusing to give up on a stubborn flame. You turn another corner, leaving behind the hiss of stubborn charcoal, and the air greets you with something softer, sweet, almost floral, but undeniably savory. You follow it, and soon you find a stall tucked against a brick wall. its steam curling lazily upward. The vendor, a round-faced man with a faded red scarf, is ladling broth with an almost guilty expression, as if hiding a secret he doesn't want anyone to notice. You crouch near a wooden crate to get closer, and that's when you hear two women whispering nearby. Have you tried his broth lately? It tastes different, one murmurs, blowing across her spoon. The other nods, eyes darting toward the vendor. I heard he accidentally dropped too much gung last month, and now everyone's addicted to it. You blink, glancing back at the vendor. His hand hovers just a second too long over a tray of ginger slices before tossing a few into the pot. He pretends not to notice how the steam instantly sharpens, filling the air with that warm, spicy bite that clings to your nose. There's a story here, you realize, one of those accidental legends. Supposedly, he'd miscalculated one chilly morning, too tired, too distracted, and tossed a handful of ginger into the broth without thinking. By the time he realized it was too late, the broth had taken on a richer, almost medicinal warmth. But when his customers tasted it, they came back the next day asking for the ginger broth, and now he can't stop making it, whether he likes it or not. The vendor stirs the pot slowly, his eyes darting toward customers every now and then as if gauging whether anyone will complain. No one does. A man slurping nearby sighs contentedly, muttering, "Ah, this is the only broth that warms my bones properly." The vendor's cheeks flush slightly, though he keeps his head down. Some historians might scoff at this. Faux recipes are supposed to be precise, balanced. Too much of anything, they argue, breaks the harmony of the broth. But others, particularly the romantic ones, still debate whether happy accidents like this shape the pho we know today. You lean closer, letting the sharp scent of ginger cut through the morning air, and you can't deny it. It smells amazing. Not overwhelming, just enough to add a soft, fiery warmth under the familiar richness of beef and bone. A little boy sitting with his grandfather blows on his noodles, asking, "Why does it taste spicy but not like chili?" The old man chuckles, tapping the boy's nose lightly. "Because this spice doesn't shout, no thee thumb, it whispers." The vendor finally catches you watching him, and for a brief second his eyes meet yours. He looks almost embarrassed, like he knows you've caught his secret. But then he shrugs slightly, as if to say, "What can I do? They like it this way now." You smile faintly and take another deep breath, letting the ginger-scented steam slide through your lungs. It's funny how something unintended can feel so right, how one tired mistake can change the taste of a whole street. As you step away, the vendor drops another few slices of ginger into the pot, trying to look casual about it. But the way the broth bubbles a little harder, almost as if approving, makes you wonder if this mistake was never a mistake at all, just pho deciding for itself how it wanted to be remembered. The street stretches into a brighter lane now, the mist thinning as the sun begins to peek through, and you catch a different kind of scent riding the morning air, fresh, green, almost grassy. You follow it, curious, and soon you find a woman crouched behind a basket so full of bean sprouts they spill over like a white, tangled waterfall. She works quickly, snapping off roots with practiced fingers, tossing the trimmed sprouts into a shallow bamboo tray beside her. Each movement is sharp, efficient, and you hear the faint snap of crisp stalks breaking, blending with the low hum of customers slurping nearby. You crouch down across from her, watching silently as she sprinkles a handful of clean sprouts into a waiting bowl. The steam rises, softening them instantly, but even as they wilt slightly, they keep that delicate crunch that makes it feel alive. A young man crouched on a stool takes his first bite, grinning. "Ah, Jianqua, so crunchy," he says with a laugh as if the sprouts are the star instead of the beef. The vendor, an older woman with strong arms, smirks faintly. "You should have been here last season," she says, her voice dry. "You'd be lucky to get 3 sprouts in your bowl." The young man looks up, surprised. "Was it that bad?" The woman shrugs, tossing another handful into the broth. "Worse, price went so high some folks joked. Bean sprouts were for the rich." And it's true, there was a time not so long ago when Ghetto was scarce, bad weather, poor harvests, whatever the reason. People had to line up early just for a handful. Some even skipped sprouts entirely, calling it the poor man's pho, while those who managed to add them boasted about it all morning. Historians still debate the real cause of the shortage, Some say it was crop failure, others argue it was just demand outpacing supply in growing cities. You watch as the vendor dumps another scoop of fresh sprouts into the pot, the thin white stalks disappearing under the broth for a moment before bobbing back up. The smell changes slightly, becoming fresher, sharper, as if the soup just woke up again. A woman eating nearby stirs her bowl with chopsticks, lifting a bundle of noodles tangled with sprouts. She takes a slow bite, sighing contentedly. The broth is warm, but the sprouts make it feel alive, she murmurs, mostly to herself. A child sitting beside her tries to fish sprouts out of his bowl with tiny chopsticks, his tongue sticking out in concentration. When he finally catches one, he lifts it proudly like a trophy before slurping it quickly, grinning as if he's just caught a fish. The vendor keeps working, her hands moving with the speed of someone who's been doing this since before the sun rose. She doesn't smile, but every time she tosses another handful of crisp sprouts into a bowl, you catch the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. You take a deep breath, letting the fresh, almost grassy scent fill your lungs. It's funny how something so small, so cheap most of the time, can feel essential, almost luxurious in the right moment. As you stand to leave, the vendor slaps a new pile of sprouts onto her tray, shaking them gently to let the dew glisten in the sunlight. The morning feels brighter suddenly, as if the whole street agrees. Yes, the broth is the heart, but the crunch of sprouts, that's the little spark of life Pho never forgets to add. The street bends into a quieter neighborhood now, where red and gold paper lanterns sway gently in the soft morning breeze. A faint hum of conversation drifts from behind closed wooden doors, and the smell of incense mixes subtly with the familiar aroma of broth. You recognize it instantly. This is the time of year when pho tastes just a little different. Not because of the recipe, but because of what the morning means. It's tit. You follow the scent until you find a stall nestled under a tree adorned with faded paper decorations. The vendor, a middle-aged man with a smile as warm as his broth, is ladling soup into bowls faster than usual. The small stools around him are full, customers sitting shoulder to shoulder, their faces pink from both the cold and the excitement of the new year. A woman in a bright red scarf laughs as she blows on her noodles, teasing the man beside her. Pho on mung mot, really? Where's your sticky rice? Your banchung? The man grins, shrugging as he slurps. I've eaten banchung for 3 days straight. He lifts his bowl slightly. This is how I start the year right. Clean broth, fresh herbs. Feels lucky. You crouch near a crate of firewood, watching them, and it's easy to see why this has become its own tradition. The steam rising from the bowls feels different today. Lighter somehow, as if even the broth knows this morning matters. There was a time, though, when eating pho on Tet morning was frowned upon. Old families insisted on proper New Year's meals. Sticky rice, pickled onions, things that symbolized wealth and longevity. Pho, some said, was too ordinary, too humble for the first morning of the year. Historians still debate when that changed. Some argue it was a practical choice during hard times. Others say younger families simply wanted something warm and quick before visiting relatives. But here, no one cares about old arguments. A boy in a new shirt beams proudly as he lifts his chopsticks, fishing out a bright green sprig of basil. His mother leans close, whispering something about eating green for a lucky year, and he nods solemnly before slurping happily. The vendor moves quickly, almost humming to himself as he refills bowls, occasionally pausing to wish each customer chuk mung nam mai. His broth simmers brighter than ever, golden fat shimmering on the surface like tiny coins. Maybe it's just coincidence, but it feels right, like the soup itself is joining in on the wishes for prosperity. A man sitting nearby raises his bowl slightly, toasting the stranger beside him. To a lucky year, he says before taking a long sip of broth. The stranger nods, grinning, and does the same. You take a slow breath, letting the smell of herbs and beef mix with the faint scent of incense in the air. There's something almost magical about it. Pho on Tet morning isn't just breakfast. It's a promise, a quiet hope carried in steam and noodles. As you step away, the vendor places another bowl onto the counter, sprinkling green onion carefully on top. He pauses for a second, smiling at the rising steam, and says softly to no one in particular, "May every bowl this year be this warm." And somehow, standing there in the soft morning light, you believe him. The lane curves gently into a quieter strip of the street where the smell of pho softens into something homier, almost playful. You hear it before you see it, a soft meow rising above the bubbling of a pot. And then you spot it, perched proudly on the corner of a wooden counter, tail wrapped neatly around its paws, sits a plump gray cat. Its fur is slightly singed at the tips, giving it a scruffy charm, and its golden eyes are fixed unwaveringly on the pot of simmering broth. The vendor, a wiry woman with sleeves rolled up, doesn't even glance at it as she stirs. "Don't even think about it, Bibchung," she mutters, her voice half scolding, half affectionate. The cat flicks an ear but doesn't move, only adjusting its position slightly to keep the best angle on the pot. You crouch near a low crate, fascinated because the cat isn't just sitting there by accident. You've heard of this one before, the so-called Bibchung, or head chef of the neighborhood. Supposedly, this cat has been sitting by the same stove for years, watching every pot like a stern supervisor. Some customers even joke they trust the broth more when the cat's watching. A man crouched on a nearby stool chuckles between slurps. "If the cat leaves, I leave," he says, winking at you. "Means the broth isn't good today." The vendor rolls her eyes but doesn't argue. Instead, she reaches over, tearing off a tiny piece of cooked beef and dropping it into a saucer beside the cat. "There," she says with a sigh. "Now stop staring at me like I'm doing something wrong." The cat leans down, sniffs the meat, and eats it with slow, deliberate bites, as if tasting critically. When it's done, it licks its paw, curls back into its sitting position, and resumes its watch over the pot. There's an old rumor about this, one historians still debate, with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Some say vendors once deliberately kept cats near their stoves, not for company, but because cats would only sit near good broth. Apparently, they disliked the smell of overcooked or spoiled meat. Others dismiss it as pure folklore, pointing out that cats simply like the warmth of the fire. But watching this cat now, tail twitching slightly every time the vendor lifts the lid, you can't help but think there's something more to it. It doesn't look sleepy or bored, it looks focused, like it's memorizing every swirl of fat in the broth. A child crouched beside his mother giggles, pointing. "Look, meh, the cat's working harder than you do." The vendor snorts at the joke, but you notice the faintest smile on her face as she stirs. The broth bubbles steadily, steam curling around the cat's whiskers. It closes its eyes briefly, inhaling deeply, and you swear it almost looks pleased. You lean back, watching the odd little partnership. The vendor stirring with practiced hands, the cat keeping silent watch, as if the two of them share a secret no one else gets to know. As you move to leave, the vendor glances at the cat and mutters, Fine, I'll skim the fat now," as if responding to an unspoken order. The cat doesn't move, just flicks its tail once, almost approvingly, and you can't help but smile. Maybe pho really does have its guardians, some human, some not. The street narrows again, dipping into a quieter, almost hidden alley where the mist lingers stubbornly like a secret. But here the quiet is broken by a sound you haven't heard much this morning. Laughter, soft and bright, bubbling up in little bursts between the low hum of voices. You follow it and find a small group of children crouched near a vendor's stall, their faces pink from the cold, their eyes wide as they lean closer to the steam rising from the pot. None of them are eating, not one. They just sit there, knees pulled to their chests, breathing deeply as if the scent alone could fill their stomachs. The vendor, an older man with white whiskers and kind eyes, doesn't shoo them away. He stirs his broth slowly, glancing at them every now and then with a quiet smile. A little girl closes her eyes dramatically, inhaling deeply. I'm full already," she says, grinning at the boy beside her. He laughs, shaking his head. "No, you have to breathe slower, then it lasts longer." Another boy crouched closest to the pot leans in, his nose almost touching the steam, and sighs like he's just tasted the broth itself. You almost laugh at the scene. It's ridiculous and a little heartbreaking all at once. There was a time, not so long ago, when pho was too expensive for most families to eat regularly. A single bowl could cost more than a day's wages, especially if you wanted beef. For many children, this was the closest they ever got, just sitting near the stalls, letting the smell do the work of filling their bellies. Historians still debate how common this was, whether it's been exaggerated by nostalgia. But the vendors tell stories of it all the time, of kids sitting quietly near their stalls, giggling and breathing in the aroma, pretending they were eating like everyone else. The vendor here doesn't speak to the children, but every now and then he tilts the pot lid just slightly, letting a bigger wave of steam escape, rolling toward them. The children cheer softly, as if he's done them a favor, their faces lighting up when the richer scent hits them. A young woman crouched on a stool nearby watches them with a sad smile. She pulls a few coins from her pocket and hands them to the vendor quietly. "Give them a bowl," she whispers. The vendor glances at her, then at the children, and nods once. When he places the first bowl in front of them, the kids stare at it, almost unsure if it's real. The boy closest to the pot is the first to grab it, his hands shaking slightly as he lifts it to his lips. He takes a careful sip, his eyes widening instantly, and the others laugh, crowding closer to share. The vendor pretends not to notice, his ladle moving steadily as if nothing unusual is happening. But you catch the way his mouth twitches at the corners, a smile he's trying not to show. You crouch a little closer, watching the children take turns slurping from the same bowl, their laughter brighter now, real. The mist swirls gently around them, carrying the warm, meaty scent through the alley, and for a moment it feels like the whole world has softened. You step away quietly, not wanting to disturb them, and as you glance back one last time, the vendor lifts his lid again, releasing another curl of steam, richer and warmer than before. Almost like a silent blessing, the alley opens slightly as you move on, the mist thinning and the air shifts again. Deeper now, thicker with that unmistakable scent of bones giving up everything they have. You follow it, and there he is, an old man crouched beside a massive pot, his face half hidden behind a wall of steam. He isn't serving customers yet. Instead, he leans over the pot like a man listening to a secret, stirring slowly, almost reverently. Every motion of his ladle is careful, as if one wrong move might wake the broth too soon. You crouch near a wooden post, close enough to feel the heat from his stove, and that's when you hear it. A soft conversation between him and another vendor crouched beside him, sipping tea from a chipped cup. 18 hours, the old man says, his voice quiet but firm. That's how long it takes. Less than that, and you're just making soup. The younger vendor snorts, shaking his head. 18 hours. No one has that kind of patience. Pho's not a wedding feast. People want breakfast. The old man smiles faintly, eyes still on his pot. Then they can eat breakfast somewhere else. This. He lifts the lid slightly and a rush of steam curls out, carrying a smell so rich it almost feels heavy. This is not for rushing. You lean closer, letting the steam hit your face, and for a moment you understand what he means. The scent isn't just beef, it's something older, deeper, like every bone in that pot has told its story overnight, dissolving quietly into the broth. There's a rumor about vendors like him, whispered across the city. Some claim they let their broth simmer for nearly a full day, stirring only occasionally, never letting it boil too hard, coaxing every bit of marrow out of the bones. Historians still argue whether this is fact or romantic exaggeration. Some insist vendors simply didn't have time for such patience. But looking at this man crouched in the misty morning light, you believe it's true. The younger vendor takes another sip of tea, muttering, "You'll waste wood doing that." The old man doesn't look up. Wood is cheaper than bad pho. You almost laugh because there's no arrogance in his tone, just quiet certainty. A boy runs up to the stall, eyes wide. "Ongai, is it ready yet?" "Not yet," the old man replies, smiling faintly. "The bones haven't finished talking." The boy tilts his head, confused, but not seriously, and sits on a low stool to wait. You stay there longer than you intend, watching the slow, deliberate movements of his ladle, the way he skims the top of the broth gently, like brushing dust off something precious. Every now and then, he dips a spoon in, tasting it silently before nodding to himself. The smell deepens as the minutes pass, thicker, richer, until even the younger vendor sitting nearby can't help but lean closer, inhaling deeply despite himself. Finally, the old man sets his ladle aside for a moment, resting his hands on his knees. He doesn't say anything, just watches the steam rise like it's an old friend keeping him company. You take one last breath, letting that deep, bone-rich scent settle in your chest, and as you move away, you can still hear his voice in your head. 18 hours. Anything less is just soup. and you believe him. The lane narrows once more, but this time the air feels tense, humming faintly with a rhythm you don't recognize at first. Then you hear it, a low, mournful wail far in the distance, cutting through the morning quiet. About an air raid siren. You freeze for a moment, glancing toward the sound, but no one else seems panicked. Instead, the people here move with a strange calmness, as if they've done this before, too many times. Vendors glance up briefly, their hands hesitating over their pots for just a second, then returning to their ladles. Customers crouched on low stools keep eating, their faces tightening but not stopping. You step closer to one of the stalls, crouching near the edge of a woven mat, and watch as a vendor, an older woman with hair tied back tightly, continues to stir her broth. Her ladle moves in slow, deliberate circles, the same as any other morning, though her eyes flick now and then toward the sky. The siren wails again, louder this time, and a little boy eating beside his father clamps his hands over his ears. The father pulls him closer but keeps slurping his noodles, whispering something you can't quite hear. Probably, "Chi mo chutoy, just a little while, Khan." A group of men crouched nearby shovel noodles into their mouths faster than usual, not out of greed but urgency. One of them mutters, half joking, "If this is my last bowl, I'm not letting it go cold." The others laugh quietly, though the sound feels heavier than humor. You breathe in deeply, the scent of pho mixing strangely with the faint tang of smoke carried by the wind. The broth smells the same, warm, rich, full of life, but the air around it feels different, taut like a string pulled too tight. There's an old rumor about these mornings one historians still discuss with a mix of disbelief and fascination. Some claim that even during bombings, certain pho stalls stayed open, their vendors refusing to abandon their pots. Whether it was stubbornness, defiance, or simply survival, no one agrees. But the stories persist, of soldiers and civilians alike crouched over bowls, slurping quickly between sirens, pretending for a few minutes that life was still ordinary. The vendor here certainly doesn't look ready to run. She glances at the sky once more, then at the customers huddled around her and mutters under her breath, "Eat while it's hot, worry later." Her ladle dips into the pot again, steady, unwavering. A man crouched beside you takes a quick bite, his hands shaking just slightly as he grips his chopsticks. He catches your eye and gives a half smile. Funny, isn't it? The world might end, but we still argue about the best broth. The siren wails again, distant but insistent, and for a moment everyone pauses, bowls halfway to their lips. But when no explosion follows, they lower their heads again, returning to their food. The slurping resumes, quiet but determined, as if each mouthful is an act of quiet rebellion. You crouch lower, inhaling the steam curling lazily from the pot, and for the first time this morning you notice how fragile it feels. The way the warmth seems to fight the cold air, as if trying to keep something alive that the rest of the world is threatening to take away. As you stand to leave, the siren blares one last time, echoing down the street, but the vendor doesn't flinch. She just stirs, her ladle scraping the bottom of the pot with slow, steady circles, as if to say, "The broth doesn't stop for fear. Not today." You leave the tension of the siren behind, as the street bends into a darker stretch where the mist feels heavier, pressing close like a blanket. The sky is still pale, barely awake, but here the city hums with a quieter rhythm, men pushing carts, shadows moving in the half-light. This is where the night owls meet the early risers, and you can feel it in the air, that strange in-between moment when the city hasn't fully decided if it's asleep or awake. And right there, under a flickering oil lamp, a pho stall glows like a small fire in the dark. The vendor is younger than most you've seen, his sleeves rolled up, hair damp from steam. His pot bubbles steadily, sending a rich, inviting aroma curling through the cool air. Around him sit men hunched over their bowls, their backs bent from long hours of work. A line of ji tho, bicycles loaded with baskets and goods, rests against the wall nearby. Their drivers crouch low on tiny stools, eating quickly before heading out again. You crouch near the edge of the stall, the damp ground cold against your knees, and listen to the soft clinking of chopsticks, the quiet slurping. No one speaks much, they just eat, their tired faces softening with each mouthful. One driver lifts his head, his breath visible in the cold air, and chuckles quietly. You keep this up, Em, and you'll never sleep again. The vendor shrugs, smiling faintly as he stirs his broth. Sleep doesn't pay for wood. Pho does. There's an old rumor about these overnight stalls. Vendors who open their pots in the deepest hours of the night just for laborers, drivers, and porters who worked until dawn. Some say it started as kindness. Others claim it was purely business. Historians still debate whether night pho was ever common or just a rare luxury for those lucky enough to find it. But standing here, you can believe it. The broth smells different somehow, richer, heavier, as if simmering in the quiet of night gives it time to thicken its soul. The steam drifts upward, catching faint glimmers of light from the lamp, glowing gold in the darkness. A man hunched on a stool takes another sip, sighing softly. This tastes better at night. Don't know why, but it does. The vendor laughs, ladling another bowl. Maybe because you're too tired to argue. You smile at that because it's true. No one here critiques the broth. No one debates cinnamon or star anise. They just eat, grateful for something warm to hold in the cold dawn. A woman sitting nearby wipes her hands on her skirt, blowing gently across her bowl. I'll dream about this later, she says quietly, mostly to herself. Better than dreaming of work. The vendor places another bowl in front of a waiting customer, his movements smooth, almost graceful despite the fatigue shadowing his eyes. The smell of fresh herbs mixes with the deeper scent of marrow, creating something almost comforting enough to make you forget the chill. As you stand to leave, the street feels softer somehow. The first hints of morning light stretch across the sky, brushing pale gray against the rooftops, but the stall still glows in its little corner, stubbornly warm. And you think, as you glance back one last time, maybe this is why pho belongs to the city so deeply, not just for mornings, but for nights like this, keeping tired hands and quiet hearts awake until the world decides to wake up with them. The road widens slightly as you move on, and the air greets you with a strange mix of scents. Broth, yes, but also something nutty, toasted, almost smoky in a way that doesn't quite belong. You follow it, curious, and find a vendor crouched behind a low wooden table, her pot bubbling gently as the mist curls around her ankles. But there's something unusual about her stall. Beside the usual tray of herbs and noodles sits a small clay bowl filled with a powdery beige mixture. You lean closer and the smell hits you, rich, salty with a deep, roasted note. Mui vung, sesame salt. The vendor sprinkles a small pinch into the pot, stirring quickly before ladling a bowl for a waiting customer. The man crouched on a low stool blows across the steam, takes a cautious sip, and his eyebrows rise. Ah, clever, he murmurs, nodding appreciatively. You crouch nearby, curious, because you've heard stories about this before. There's an old rumor, half forgotten now, about a rainy morning when a vendor accidentally ruined her broth. The rainwater had thinned it so much that the flavor almost disappeared. Desperate, she tossed in mui vung, hoping to save the taste. And strangely, it worked. Customers loved the subtle nuttiness, the way it warmed the broth without overpowering it. Historians still debate whether this was a true practice or just a single vendor's clever improvisation. Some dismiss it as a myth, saying pho should never taste like anything but beef and spices. Others argue that street vendors often experimented quietly, adjusting recipes based on weather, wood quality, or sheer necessity. The vendor here doesn't look like she's experimenting anymore. She looks confident. She sprinkles another pinch of sesame salt into a fresh bowl, stirs gently, and hands it to an old woman, who takes one slow sip and smiles, her eyes closing in quiet approval. You catch the faint, roasted aroma rising from the steam now, mingling with the deeper beef scent. It's not overwhelming, just a whisper like a secret you wouldn't notice unless someone told you it was there. A boy crouched beside his father tastes it carefully, then looks up, grinning. It's like pho, but happier, he says, giggling at his own words. His father laughs, nodding in agreement. The vendor glances at them, her face softening for a brief moment before she turns back to her pot. You take another breath, letting that nutty undertone settle in your chest. It's funny, isn't it? One wrong turn, one rainy morning, and suddenly, pho learns a new trick. As you step away, the vendor sprinkles another quiet pinch of mui vung into her pot, her hands steady, her face calm, as if this little secret doesn't need to be defended anymore. And you think, smiling faintly, maybe pho has always been this way, ready to change just a little as long as it stays warm enough. to keep people coming back. The street stretches into a quieter, more open space now where the mist feels thinner, almost transparent, and the sunlight begins to slip gently between the tiled rooftops. You catch a softer smell this time, not just broth, but something that carries a strange weight to it, like memory itself, drifting in the air. You follow it and find an old man sitting on a low wooden bench beside a stall, his hands wrapped tightly around a steaming bowl. He doesn't eat right away, instead he just stares at it, eyes glistening faintly as the steam curls around his lined face. The vendor, a young woman barely out of her teens, crouches nearby, watching him with quiet curiosity. "Bakundi," she says softly. "It'll get cold." The old man finally lifts his spoon, swirling it gently through the broth as if afraid to disturb it. "I haven't tasted this in 30 years, he murmurs, almost to himself. You crouch near a stack of firewood, close enough to hear him now, and his words spill out slowly like a story he's been holding too long. "When I left, it was this smell that followed me. Not the sound of the streets, not the sight of the rooftops. Just this." The vendor tilts her head. "You left Hanoi?" He nods, sipping carefully, his hands trembling slightly. "France, a long time ago. There was pho there, of course, restaurants with bright signs and pretty bowls, but it never smelled like this, never felt like this." There's a pause, heavy and warm, as he sets the spoon down and leans closer to the bowl, inhaling deeply, almost desperately. You can feel it too, the way the broth carries more than just flavor. It carries mornings, conversations, laughter, arguments, all folded into the steam like old photographs. The couple sitting nearby glance at him, smiling faintly. One whispers, "He must have missed this so much," and the other nods silently, stirring her own bowl. Historians still debate how much pho changed when it traveled overseas. Some claim the adaptations ruined its soul, while others insist pho has always been about survival, about becoming whatever the moment demands. But listening to this old man, you feel like none of that matters. This isn't about authenticity, it's about coming home. He takes another sip, slower this time, closing his eyes as if imprinting every note of the broth into his memory. The broth, even the steam feels right, he whispers, like the street is the same as it was when I was young. The vendor smiles softly, her hands stilling on the ladle. "Maybe it is, Bach. Pho doesn't forget." He chuckles quietly, shaking his head, and finally begins to eat properly, slurping noodles with the careful joy of someone who doesn't want the moment to end too quickly. You watch him for a while, the steam softening the lines on his face, making him look younger somehow. And you think, as you breathe in that same familiar scent, maybe pho is more than just breakfast. Maybe it's a map leading people home even when they've been gone for decades. As you move away, the old man takes another slow sip, his smile faint but certain, and murmurs to no one in particular, 30 years was too long. The street narrows again, leading you into a stretch where the morning has fully woken, sunlight spilling gently across cracked stone walls. But here, instead of the quiet slurping of breakfast, you hear voices, low, hushed, tense. Two men crouched at a pho stall, leaning close over their bowls as if the steam itself might hide their words. You slip into a corner beside a stack of empty baskets, pretending to admire the way the sunlight hits the rising steam, but your ears catch every word. "Are you sure this is safe?" One whispers, his chopsticks pausing midair. The other, younger, keeps his head down, stirring his noodles lazily. "Safe enough. No one listens to men eating pho. Too ordinary." You glance at them more closely now. The first man has calloused hands, his jacket patched at the elbows. The younger one's eyes dart now and then toward the street, head scanning every passing figure. And suddenly you realize this isn't just breakfast. There's an old rumor you've heard before, one whispered in stories told late at night, that pho stalls once doubled as meeting points for quiet resistance, for exchanging messages and passing coded words when no one else was paying attention. Historians still debate this, of course. Some dismiss it as romanticized legend, insisting no one would risk planning anything important in such public spaces. Others point out that the noise, the steam, the endless stream of customers made it the perfect place to hide in plain sight. The younger man leans forward now, his chopsticks tapping twice against the rim of his bowl. A small gesture, but deliberate. The older man nods slightly, sliding a folded scrap of paper under his bowl. letting the edge soak slightly in broth as if it were just a napkin. A vendor ladles another bowl nearby, glancing at them once but saying nothing. Maybe he doesn't notice, or maybe he's seen this too many times to care. The younger man lifts his bowl, sipping loudly, almost exaggeratedly, as the older man slips the paper into his sleeve in one smooth motion. To anyone else, they look like two tired laborers sharing a quiet morning meal. The older man mutters softly, "You should go first, don't linger." The younger one smirks faintly, blowing across his noodles. "I'll finish my pho, no point risking my life on an empty stomach." Despite the tension, you almost laugh because there's something absurdly human about it. Revolution, fear, secrecy, and still. Pho first. The younger man slurps the last of his noodles quickly, stands, and places a coin on the counter without another glance. He walks away without looking back, disappearing into the sunlight. The older man stays, eating slowly now, his movements calm, almost leisurely, as if to erase any suspicion. You stay crouched a little longer, breathing in the familiar scent of broth and herbs, and you think about how many mornings might have held secrets like this, whispered between sips, hidden in the steam. As you step away, the vendor wipes the counter with a cloth, glances once at the older man, and goes back to stirring the pot. No questions, no words, just the quiet, steady rhythm of Faflisha, as if the street itself has learned to keep its secrets. The street opens wider now, bathed fully in morning light. The mist has burned away, leaving only soft curls of steam rising from the last simmering pots. You move slowly, almost reluctantly, because something about this stretch feels different. Quieter, calmer, as if the city itself is finally taking a long, deep breath. You stop near a stall tucked beneath an old banyan tree. Its roots twist into the cracked stones like fingers holding onto the past, and the branches sway gently above, scattering dappled sunlight across the ground. A single vendor remains, an old woman with silver hair tied neatly into a bun, her hands moving with the steady patience of someone who has done this for a lifetime. She isn't rushing now. The crowd has thinned. Only a few customers linger, eating slowly as if trying to stretch the morning a little longer. You crouch near a low wooden bench, letting the warmth of the stove brush against your legs. The smell here is softer, less sharp than the bustling stalls earlier. The broth bubbles lazily, its aroma rich but mellow, like a song sung too many times to still be loud, but still every bit as beautiful. A man sitting on a stool sighs happily, placing his chapsticks down. "This is the same as it was 30 years ago," he says, voice soft with something that sounds like gratitude. The old woman glances at him, smiling faintly. "Not the same," she replies, ladling another bowl with quiet grace. "Nothing ever stays the same, but pho tries its best." You take a deep breath, and it's true. The smell carries all the things you've seen this morning. Smoke curling under thatched roofs, the sharp green of fresh herbs, the soft crunch of bean sprouts, the secret warmth of ginger, the laughter of children pretending to eat with just steam. It's all there, somehow, folded into this single quiet pot. A child crouched beside his grandmother lifts his bowl carefully, blowing across the surface. "Why do we always eat this, Ba?" he asks, his voice curious but sleepy. His grandmother pats his shoulder gently. "Because it reminds us who we are. Even when the world changes, this stays close to us." The boy nods slowly, as if accepting that answer completely, and takes a loud slurp that makes everyone nearby chuckle softly. Historians will always debate pho, where it began, what it borrowed, what it lost, and what it became. But sitting here, crouched near this old banyan tree, you feel like none of that matters. Pho isn't history, it's memory, carried quietly in every bowl passed from one pair of hands to the next. The old woman lifts her ladle again, her movements slow, almost ceremonial. For a moment, the sunlight catches the surface of the broth, turning the thin layer of oil into tiny golden circles. She places the bowl carefully in front of a waiting customer, and the steam drifts upward, shimmering like a final sigh of morning. You linger there, letting the warmth sink into you, letting the soft sounds of slurping, laughter, and quiet conversation fade slowly into the air. The city feels softer now, calmer, as if all its streets are breathing together in relief. You close your eyes for a moment, and the smells, the sounds, the heat of the broth, all of it melts into one quiet thought. A century of mornings and pho still tastes like home. The breeze shifts gently, scattering the last curls of steam, and the old woman hums softly to herself as she stirs her pot, her voice barely louder than a whisper. And then, like a lullaby meant only for you, the city settles into stillness. The scent of pho lingering in the sunlit air, warm enough to carry you into dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.